What's up, people? Welcome back to the sickest channel on YouTube, and I'm your boy J90, and today I'm going to be doing a newbie killer tier list. So for any of you people that have gone out and bought Dead by Daylight recently, or are thinking about buying Dead by Daylight for the upcoming Resident Evil chapter release, which is tomorrow, 15th of June, then this is the video for you. So before we jump straight into it, a little bit about me. I've been playing Dead by Daylight for a couple of years now. I did recently return about 6 months ago, and I've been rank 1 killer for the last 2 months, and I've managed to get to rank 1 survivor last month, and I have about 500 hours of gameplay, so not too bad. Obviously I have had a few moments where I have had times and breaks apart from the game, but I'm back now and I'm hooked, and I really want this tier list to help you guys, because some of the advice that I'm going to be giving is what really helped me get to rank 1 killer. And I know there is a lot of people out there that do not know how to get to rank 1 killer, that do camp the hooks because they think that's the right thing to do. But I'm going to show you what killers you need to do to get the job done and what's going to help you on your journey. Before we jump right into it, I just want to say that this is completely my opinion, and I encourage you to have your own, and that this is not going to be reflective of top tier, and it's not going to take into consideration Swift type comps that you can play against for survivor teams, and that means survive with friends. You will come across those. It doesn't happen as often as you think, so don't worry about it. If you do come across survive with friends and they do absolutely batter you, just know that that's not a reflection of the learning process and the help or the guidance that I'm trying to give you guys. So again, just before we get into the tier list, I just want to say that when I'm going through these killers and their powers and the reason why I am placing them within the tier list, that you have got a base level of understanding about the game. And if you don't, then I suggest you go over to the killer how to play and you play the killer how to play tutorial, and you also look at all the different statistics that you can do to understand everything. And here you can see I've just booted up the killer tutorial there for you. So I recommend that you go ahead and you do that, and once you've completed the killer tutorial, because this guide is specific to killer people that are interested in playing killer, that you also have a little look at all the different tutorials here that explain to you all the different effects, what the generators do, objects of the game, and all that good stuff. So once you've done all that and you've played a few times and you have a base level of understanding, then come back to this video and hopefully it'll make more sense. I will do more guides in the future. This is my first video back on this channel, so leave a comment if there's something that you want me to specifically go through. But without further ado, let's have a little look at the tier list. So the 5 categories that we're going to be going through, starting from amazing to very good, then to average, not so good, and actively avoid. And when we look for the killers, we're going to be looking specifically at their power and how they can help you in the game, as well as sort of complement your learning, but also whether their perks are worth going for. So we'll start off with the first 5 killers that you get for free, which is the Trapper, Wraith, Hillbilly, Nurse, and then Huntress. And once we've gone through the 3 killers, then we'll start going through the paid DLC, and whether I can honestly recommend you paying out for that DLC to get that character, either for their perks or just for that character in general. So first things first, Trapper. As you can see, I've got the Trapper to level 40, purely just to get his perks. They're not the best perks, and I don't think they're something that you need at the start of your career in Dead by Daylight. And I also think that the Trapper, albeit can be fun, you're already on the back edge in terms of add-ons and his perks just in general. So let's just imagine that you're a new killer and you've got no other killer perks other than the basic ones. You obviously have the Trapper's perks, and then you have the odd add-on that you can get. I can't recommend him. You would spend too much time farting about with traps that all the survivors go around, do all the generators, and before you know it, you would have hit a few people, got a few people down, and you'll probably get looped by average survivors. And I just don't think that the Trapper is a fun way to start off Dead by Daylight. And so for that reason, I think when we look at the Trapper, the only place that I can really put him in is to actively avoid. In terms of his perks, like I said, there's not anything too special to go for. And the fact that you can destroy pallets 10, 15 and 20% faster at rank 1 to 3, it's not going to benefit you enough for it to really matter. And so for that reason, I just cannot recommend the Trapper as a starting killer. Moving on to the next killer, we've got the Wraith. Now, the Wraith has the ability to go stealth, which at the beginning of the game, a lot of people won't necessarily be actively looking for that. And even once they know that you're a Wraith, they won't always see you. So his special ability is quite simple in terms of, as soon as you start the game, you don't have to fuss about like a trapper and put traps down. You literally just, you find somebody, you go for the furthest generator away from you, you hide behind something. If you hear them clanking on a generator, great, because then you can unstealth. You'll get a nice speed boost when you come out of your stealth and an increased lunge. Whack them, you start the chase, you can start going for them. And then if you down them, hook them, go back invisible, rinse and repeat. Obviously, as you get higher and higher through the ranks, more and more people will start to give you the runaround. However, you can always back out of the chase and go find somebody else, or you can go back into stealth, catch up with them again after you've, say, broken a pallet, and then try and get them, block them off. I think the Wraith's a really good killer to start off in Dead by Daylight because you don't need to worry too much. His power is quite simple. You go stealth, you find a survivor, you unstealth, and you smack them, and then you're in the chase. So you can finesse the finer parts of the game in chasing and learning that part of it, which applies to all killers, rather than worrying too much about his power. And when you do need to use his power, it gets the job done. In terms of his perks, I do think there's 2 perks that can help you, albeit they are considered by the community to be relatively weak. The first one is Predator, which allows the scratch marks left by survivors to spawn slightly closer together. And I think this helps newer killers because the scratch marks everywhere, it can be a little bit like hard to track. So Predator will make it so that the scratch marks are a lot closer together, and it will help you track survivors when they're running away from you in the chase. And then I also think that Bloodhound isn't too bad either, in terms of the blood that drops from survivors is illuminated like a bright red, so you'll be able to see that, and that will help you track survivors even easier. And so therefore, when you first start off the game, tracking can be quite tough, and with everything else going on in the game, trying to learn new maps, learning all the sort of noise notifications, coming across the odd survivor that's not necessarily a complete noob, these will help you on your way. And then his last perk is just nice to have, although I personally would actively avoid it, because when you use Shadowborn and it increases your field of view, it can be disorientated when you go back to another survivor without it. So personal opinion, don't use Shadowborn, Bloodhound, Predator while you're learning. Training wheel perks basically. So I think for that reason, and given that he's free and you get him out of the box, I would have to place the Wraith in solid, very good. I think he's very, very good. I don't think he's amazing, because there are other killers on this list I think that can do the job better than he can. But he is very good, and he does have add-ons that will help you, that are almost like perks. So, highly recommend. Next up is the Hillbilly, and to be honest, the Hillbilly is the first killer on this list where he has a instant down ability with his chainsaw. However, for new people, learning how to use this chainsaw is not going to be easy, and what you'll find yourself doing with Hillbilly, which I see a lot of new killers, is they finally get somebody down and then they camp the hook, because they know that it's not easy to get the down, but they know they can insta down somebody if they try and go for the save, and it kind of creates this camping mentality. So therefore I would say not to potentially play Hillbilly to begin with unless you really want a challenge. he is very weak unless you are extremely good with him. The only reason you might want to go through the pain of leveling him up is for some of his perks. Now, the Hillbilly does have a really good perk called Tinkerer, which is when a generator is repaired 70% repair progress, it triggers a loud noise notification and you are granted the undetectable status. So you can catch people off guard and also know that they're working on a generator and very close to completing it. However, outside of this perk, I couldn't recommend the Hillbilly, and therefore I'm going to have to say that we actively avoid playing the Hillbilly as a new killer. Next up is the Nurse, and the Nurse is a killer that, if straight off the bat you want to play the absolute best of the best, arguably the best of the best, but you want the hardest learning curve where you have got to learn the game, the maps, the way survivors play, the perks. You need to fine tune how to play this killer as well, and she's not a pick up and master, she's a play and master, and you only master her by constantly playing her. If you think you can take on all of that in one go, then the Nurse might be for you. Otherwise, I would say she's not so good. However, she does have some pretty cool perks that I could recommend to you. So Strider, again, another training wheel perk, and arguably a very good perk for another killer, which we'll explain later. But she allows you to hear survivors breathing, and their pain is a lot louder, so you'll be able to track survivors a lot easier if they're running around a corner or not quite near you. And then to complement that, Thanatophobia also will just genuinely slow down the game the more people that you have injured. And finally, for anybody that's healing nearby you, you'll be able to see their auras. So if they're healing with a med kit or somebody else is healing them, it can be a really, really good perk. So my recommendation would be that if you feel like these three perks could really help you, and they definitely would help you, especially for stealth killers, which we'll go through later, then you could save up 400 to 500k blood points and just go for these perks that unlock at 30, 35 and 40, and then come back to her when you're ready for a challenge and you understand the base game. However, because of how difficult she is, I have no choice, unfortunately, to put her in not so good. Next up, we have the Huntress, and she is our first projectile killer. She does run a little bit slightly slower than the rest of the killers we said. Oh, actually, one thing to note, she doesn't run any slower than Nurse. Nurse is the slowest killer, but obviously she has a teleport, so that is why she has that. However, the Huntress does walk slower than the Trapper, Wraith and Hillbilly. Usually I think it's about 10% faster than the survivors. Don't quote me on that. So being a projectile killer, she has the ability for you to wind up a hatchet, so hold your special ability and throw it, and you can damage a survivor like you would with a normal attack, but obviously it's ranged. She has an extremely high ceiling cap. However, you don't have to be incredible with her to still do a good job against survivors that are not so good. So the more the survivors are better, the better you need to be, and vice versa. I wouldn't necessarily say that if you can track down and end chases quickly with her, she's not very perk reliant. So she could be a good killer, but she's definitely going to be harder than, say, Wraith, but with a higher ceiling cap, but maybe not as difficult as Nurse. Again, that's subject to opinion. In terms of perks, there really isn't much to say about the first two, and the only last one that could be of fairly benefit to you is Huntress Lullaby, which will make skill checks harder. But while you're at the start of the game, the reality is that it's not going to be that difficult for you to be able to hear survivors when they miss a skill check, and so for that reason this probably isn't going to be that beneficial. I certainly wouldn't play her just to get this perk at the beginning, and so for that reason I think I'm going to have to put the Huntress in not so good. but I do think that she would be better than the nurse. And the same goes for Hillbilly. So left being the best for that category and the far right being the worst. So that is all of the 3 killers that you get with the base game. From now on out, we're going to be talking about killers that you have to pay DLC for, and I'm going to tell you whether I recommend you buying them or not, and where they might suit your playstyle. So first up is Michael Myers, and he is an extremely iconic horror movie killer, and the shape is arguably probably one of the worst killers in the game, to be honest. And the reason for that is because you start off really slow, and you have to use your special ability to build up your evil within. Once you get into evil within 2, you can never go back, and then you have to get into evil within 3 to be able to insta down people. Also, once you hit evil within 2, you can walk faster, so you're extremely slow, but you have no terror radius. In terms of perks, if I'm completely honest, there's only really one perk that would be extremely useful as a new killer. The other 2 are very situational on any certain builds, and therefore we won't be talking about those. Save the best for last, unlocked at level 30, allows you to get a stackable decrease to your cooldown after you successfully hit a basic attack. And therefore, once you get this up to a maximum of 8 stacks, it can be extremely oppressive. However, the likelihood of you being able to track accurately who your obsession is, remember who that person is, and actively avoid them could be quite challenging, and therefore this perk could add an additional complexity that you're not really ready for while you're still learning the game, as well as having to learn how to stalk people, build up your evil within, finally get into evil within 3. You probably mistime it a few times as well, which quite get frustrating. And so for that reason, I honestly don't think that I can recommend the shape, aka Michael Myers, and therefore I would choose to actively avoid him. Although I do think that he could be more fun than Hillbilly and Trapper. Okay, so moving on then, so we've got the Hag, and the Hag also moves at a slower speed similar to the Huntress. She has the advantage over the Trapper of being able to place multiple traps at the very start of the trial. The Trapper only has 1, and he has to then go and collect them. The difference being that with the Trapper, if a survivor actually runs into that trap, they're stuck in it and have to try and release, whereas with the Hag, the survivor will have their camera shift towards the clone that comes from the trap being triggered, and then you have the ability to teleport to it if you're within range. With the Hag, she takes quite a lot of setup time, and I think the time that you would take setting the traps, and probably in places that are not really that good, will most likely make the game a lot harder for you than you need it to be. And therefore, although she is an extremely good killer, I think as a new player, I'd probably actively avoid her. Having said that though, she has got some really, really good perks, ones being Hex Ruin at 35 and Hex Devour Hope at 40. So Hex Ruin is an extremely common perk, which basically regresses generators from 100% to 200, depending on the level that you have it, when survivors are pulled off of a generator or they're no longer working on it. So this can be a really good perk if you can go around and distract survivors from working on the generators. And then Devour Hope, another Hex perk, also allows you to insta down survivors once you've hooked 3 people and this totem is still up. So again, can be an extremely oppressive perk and be really good. And so for that reason, if you did really want a challenge, then you could go for the Hag, and these would be 2 perks that work extremely well on pretty much every killer in their own right. However, outside of the perks, and given this is a tier list for noobs and for your healthiness in the game early on, I would say that the hag is not so good, but I would say that she's better than the Huntress and the nurse. Alright, next up we've got the Doctor. Now, the Doctor is quite unique in the sense that he allows you to track survivors by using these special abilities. So he has two abilities, one where you can charge up a stun. It can be directed depending on which way you're facing, and if you time it right, you can stop survivors from jumping over pallets, throwing pallets, jumping over vaults, that type of stuff. So you can learn how to use this power and then follow up with a basic attack. So that's one element of complexity that can be really good for the Doctor. And then the second of all is you have charge ability that you can use, where it gives you the ability to see if there's any survivors within your terror radius and make them scream. So it's a really good tracking perk. And then outside of those two abilities, he's basically just a basic killer. In terms of his perks, he has a perk called Monitor and Abuse that is extremely good for stealth killers, but arguably still good for the Doctor. But just take into consideration that if you're not in the chase and you use your charged ability, you have a lower terror radius, but an increased terror radius when you're in the chase. So if you see multiple people, you could find somebody, get into the chase, hear the chase music, see the points come up in the top right, and then as soon as you have activated the chase, activate your ability because you've got that increased terror radius, and then you can figure out where everybody is. In addition to that, you do have another perk at 40 called Overcharge, which is a nice additional gen regression perk should the survivor fail. And at the beginning of your career in Dead by Daylight, most people will fail on an overcharged generator. So I think with his ability to help track and the fact that he has pretty good power and an okay perk, I'm going to have to say that the Doctor is easily very good. And I could probably say he's better than Wraith. Okay, next up we've got the Cannibal. So from a DLC perk perspective, and I will jump straight into this before we talk about his power, he's arguably one of the best killers to shed a bit of money on. And the reason for that is because what you'll learn in Dead by Daylight is it's extremely grindy, and blood points can take an eternity to build up. With this perk, it gives you a stackable bonus for every single unique survivor that you've hooked for the first time, and at rank 3 it goes all out to 100%. So with this perk you can get 100% more blood points, and it stacks up and you really notice a difference. In addition to that, any survivor that's past 40 meters from you, from the hook that you put the survivor on, you'll be able to see them with their aura unless they hide in a locker or they have some sort of perk that negates aura reading abilities. So not only do you get a fairly decent tracking perk, you also get decent blood points from it. But I don't think the fun quite stops there. Unlike Hillbilly, the Cannibal has an easier time pulling off his insta down with his chainsaw. So the difference between the two is that the Hillbilly charges up his chainsaw and then will run forward, and you have very, very limited movement in how you can curve it. Whereas the Cannibal has charges on the chainsaw which you activate, and then you press the button and activate it again to keep swinging your chainsaw, and you can effectively catch up with the survivor and insta down them. If they throw down a pallet, then you break the pallet instantly. So once you've learned how to use the chainsaw with Bubba, he can be extremely oppressive and help you win a lot of games. I think the problem lies with this killer where a lot of people will get stuck or won't be able to develop past the point where they're not able to get easy chainsaw hits. And sometimes as you get better and better with Bubba, you have to understand whether, can I insta down somebody in this loop with my chainsaw, or do I just need to basic attack them and then hit them again afterwards? And those are the types of things that you'll learn with practice and with experience. However, should you get frustrated, you might find yourself being a bit of a camper. And that's just purely because it's pretty impossible for survivors to unhook safely without you probably downing them with the chainsaw. I would recommend you avoiding doing that and actually learn him. Go through the pain of hitting obstacles, going into the tantrum, which does put you at a massive disadvantage within the chase, and learning him and learning the maps, because I promise you it will pay off. And I can honestly say that I think that the Cannibal, aka Leatherface, aka Bubba, is the first killer that we're going to put into the amazing. He has great potential for you to learn loops. He has an extremely good perk that gives you blood points, and he also has the ability to insta down with little effort once you get used to it. And so for that reason, I'm going to be putting him in the amazing tier list. Alright, next up we've got Freddy Krueger. So Freddy Krueger's interesting because he is fairly basic in terms of what he sets out to do. So he's just a mouse one attacking killer. He doesn't have any insta downs, but he does do a lot of slow down passively. So there's lots of things that are happening in the game with Freddy passively that you don't necessarily need to worry about when you're first learning the game. He does have the ability to put snares down, which can slow people in the loops, which is great. He did recently get a nerf, but he's still really, really good. And you do have the ability to teleport to any generator that's not been fixed. In terms of perks, they're pretty bad. I definitely wouldn't be gunning for Freddy for the perks, but if you want a killer where you can focus on learning loops, have a way to slow people down in loops with your snares, and also have the ability to traverse across the map, I would have to say that that makes Freddy, again, another amazing killer, especially when you're first starting off the game. And we are going to put him after Billy. Not really what else to say about Freddy. He's just an all-round good killer and easy to pick up and play when you're new. Alright, next up we have the Pig, and Pig is our next stealth killer after Wraith. The Pig is pretty bad. She heavily relies on RNG, and I don't think she can do anything that any of the other killers can do better. However, she is a mouse one killer, so you could obviously learn ways of the game with her. She has the ability to crouch, and then she can dash, so as you get more experienced you can get people to loops, wait for them to drop the pallet, or if they don't, mind game them, charge into them, hit them. Once you've got them down, you put a bear trap on them. That bear trap might come off once, might come off second time that the survivor tries to get off, might happen 4 times. Very, very, very rare, but it does slow down the game. Outside of that though, she's not very good, and I couldn't recommend her for a new killer. In terms of perks, you could argue that surveillance is a good perk to let you know once regression starts happening on generators, and also make your choice could help if you don't camp hooks and you're at least 32 meters away, and then the survivor that's picked up their friend off the hook is insta-downable for 40 seconds. Where this perk kind of falls a bit short is if you're in a chase, when it goes off, you have to make the judgment call. Do I leave the chase that I'm in to go for this other survivor who you may or may not know who's done the rescue, if there's 3 of them there, or 2 of them and someone on the hook? And so you can sometimes be put in this situation where you're not really quite sure what to do and you kind of outwit yourself. And so for that reason, it's not my favourite perk, and it's not one I really like with Pig. And as you can see, admittedly, I've only got the Pig to level 17, so who am I to say anything? And there are pigs that have absolutely destroyed me and my teams, but that was mostly because the RNG was on side for me not being able to escape from her traps within two boxes, which would seem reasonable, but it doesn't happen very often. And so for that reason, as a new killer, I'm going to say that she's not so good. But I would say that she's probably easier to use than the Hag, the Huntress, and the Nurse. Alright, next up we have the Clown. And the Clown, in my honest opinion, is really, really bad. And I couldn't recommend him if you are new to the game. He has a confusing mechanic, I think, that you wouldn't necessarily want to track with the bottles. So one bottle that can make survivors scream, slow them down. Another bottle that can speed you up, but could speed up the survivor if they manage to loop around and use it. I think once you master the Clown, you can end chases really quick. But he doesn't really have any other map pressure, and you're just at a disadvantage with him as a whole. And to be honest, I've never really been a fan of him. I just feel like he really needs something different. And so think about it from my perspective. You're new to the game, or newish, and you're trying to learn everything, and now you've got to track your bottles and then learn the trajectory to throw them where you want them to land. And sometimes you can throw a bottle, get a hit, but the survivor still manages to loop you anyway. And it can just be a huge time waste. So for him as a killer, I absolutely would actively avoid him. I think where he shines is with his perks, specifically Bamboozle and Pop Goes the Weasel. So Bamboozle for allowing you to vault faster and block the vault, so for strong loops like the shack, and sometimes an L wall, and maybe sometimes in big buildings, you can block survivors off and make the loop a lot easier. Combine that with a good bottle and you're probably going to hit them, if not down them, whatever state they're in. And then Pop Goes the Weasel is fantastic because once you've hooked somebody, you can go to a generator that's being worked on or was being worked on, and you can destroy a quarter of its progression instantly. So it makes it even more worth your time to hit generators, especially after hooks. And so if it was just the perks that you really wanted, then I would recommend him. But if you're going to put hard-earned cash into him and expect to have a really good time, I'm afraid the Clown is not going to be the one for you, and you're going to feel like you've been shortchanged. And so for that reason, I'm going to say that he's not so good. And the only reason why I think I'm going to put him in not so good and not actively avoid is just because of his perks. If it's just these perks that you want, then he could be very, very good, valuable to you to have hidden perks on other killers. But if you just want to play him for himself, then he would definitely be an actively avoid. Alright, and next up is the Spirit. Now, the Spirit is arguably one of the best killers in the game. She does run at a slower rate, so similar to the Huntress and the Hag. However, she has an ability that allows her to go invisible, and while you are invisible phasing around, you can still see scratch marks. Now, once you've played the game for a while and you understand how to track survivors when you think about the Wraith and the training wheel perks that he has for tracking. You can move over to Spirit and apply that knowledge to be able to hunt survivors down when you're in the chase, and therefore the Spirit can be an extremely powerful killer, and you would still have to deal with loops, but have the advantage that you can mind game the survivors and there's not really too much they can do. I think in the early days of playing the Spirit, you'll probably mind game yourself more than you'll be mind gamed by survivors, and so once you get past learning when to phase properly and when's the right time to do it, the Spirit will definitely be a very powerful killer to play, and you'll have a lot of fun with her. In terms of perks, I would say that she has an extremely strong perk with Haunted Ground, which means that if the survivor cleanses the totem, then they'll be exposed, and everyone will be exposed for 40 seconds up to 60 depending if you got it on rank 3, which will allow you to insta down people. And to be honest, that perk is quite godly at times and can really pay off. So I think for that reason, I don't think you're going to have as easy a time learning her ability, but if you put the time into it and use that to your advantage, she is definitely amazing. And I'm going to have to put her above Freddy. Just appreciate that she's going to be harder to use than Freddy, but once you start to learn her, she is going to be incredible. Alright, next up we have the Legion. So the Legion is a killer that gives you a lot of map knowledge once you've injured them with the Feral Frenzy, and learning when to stay in Feral Frenzy and when to not is going to be something that's going to take you a bit of time to figure out when is the right time to do it. In a lot of cases against new survivors, they will heal and they'll probably have self-care, so they'll waste so much time once you've Feral Frenzied hit them, because they'll have to mend, then self-heal, and then get back to whatever they were doing. When you first start off as Legion, you can get a little bit caught up in injuring everybody. If people are really far away from you once you've Feral Frenzied somebody, cancel the power and just go for the normal chase. Hook them, then look for somebody else. Feral Frenzy will probably be back up by the time you find them. You might be closer to more survivors, and then repeat the process. Just appreciate that the whole time you're doing that, you're probably going to have generators pop. But in terms of his ease of use, he's very easy to use, and you'll appreciate the extra speed when you're in Feral Frenzy. In terms of perks, Discordance is probably one of my favourite perks for tracking, because a lot of the time survivors will bunch up on generators to get them completed as quickly as possible, especially at the start of a trial. And so to be notified when any generator is being worked on by multiple people is extremely powerful, and even more powerful as the Legion, given you need to try and injure everybody. So for that reason, this perk alone is going to be godly on any killer that you decide to take it on. And then Iron Maiden's just a nice extra to have for killers that need to reload at lockers, i.e. the Huntress. So you lock opening them faster, and also if anybody gets into a locker, especially with barbecue and chili, if they figure out you've got that, then they'll suffer from the exposed status effect, giving you the ability to insta down them and knowing where they are. So because of that, and I think his ease of use to be able to play, not master but play, and with his perks, I'm going to have to say that Legion is definitely average. It's really hard for me to put him in the very good. If you want him for his perk, then I'll say he's very good. If you want him to actually play, master, and try and win a lot of your games, he's going to be average. You're going to come across people and big maps and times when his power is going to let you down, and you're going to feel a bit disheartened, and that's why I'd put him in the average. Right, next up we've got the Plague. So the Plague is an extremely difficult killer to master, Mostly because she's quite unique in terms of her power and the way it works. Knowing when to use your corruption purge will be difficult, and so when you're trying to make people sick with your vile purge, you'll probably find that it will take you a very long time to get very good with the accuracy of it. And as you can see, I've only got her to 45, and as much fun as I do have with her, there's a lot to learn, and there are times when you find that people just absolutely slam dunk you. So for that reason, I tend to avoid the plague. However, she does have some incredible perks, and for that reason she could be very desirable if you were inclined to want to take those. So Corrupt Intervention obviously blocks the free Furbish generators from you for up to 120 seconds, so 2 minutes. And Infectious Fright will tell you if it's any survivors within your terror radius once you have put another survivor into the dying state. So this can be really good information. Couple that with barbecue and chili, you'll know if people are near you or further away. If you down somebody and Infectious Fright goes off, they're nearby. If you down somebody and it doesn't go off and then you hook them, you know you're probably going to see them on barbecue and chili. So those two perks together can be extremely amazing. So if it was just the perks that I would say you were going for and wasn't necessarily up for a very steep learning curve, I would have to say that the Plague is easily very good, just because her perks are quite godly and very, very useful across all of the killers. But she is very difficult, and so you're going to have a lot of a harder time using her than anybody above her in very good and the amazing tier. And she's quite easily going to be tougher than some of the other killers in the lower tier, but has more to give if you reach her perks. Okay, so next up we've got Ghostface. Now, as you can see, level 20 with Ghostface, not really a killer that I've sunk my teeth into yet, and he is on my to-do. And so for that reason, just for the pure fact that he is the killer that I have played the least, it's difficult for me to be completely transparent in terms of where I think he places. And so for that reason, I'm going to have to put him in the average, because although he has the ability to insta-down people once he's stalked them enough, similar to Michael Myers, you will find that people will get you out of your power a lot, and you probably won't be as sneaky as you think you'll be in. And without really good add-ons, he can be quite difficult to master. And once you get in the chase with somebody and you haven't stalked them enough to insta-down them, you're just a basic killer with a power that can be quite difficult to get really good at. So for that reason, I'm going to have to obviously put him in average. As far as information goes for his perks, the only perk that really stands out to me is Thrilling Tremors. So after you pick up a survivor, all generators not being repaired by survivors are blocked by the entity and cannot be repaired for the next 16 seconds. This can be really useful to know what generator is being worked on. Obviously, it can only be triggered once every 100 seconds at rank 3, and I think that's reduced at... and I think that's reduced at... at rank 1, and I think it's reduced at rank 2 and rank 3. So there's not really a lot I have to say about Ghostface, other than, unless you really like the character and you want to be very stealthy, but also have a lot to learn in terms of being able to use your power effectively, then, you know, he might be for you. But in terms of paying money for him and how much enjoyment you might get out of him, for me, not much. But again, we could revisit this and my thoughts could change in the future. Alright, so next up we have the Demogorgon, and given that the Demogorgon is not the killer that I've played the most, he's actually my favourite. I really like Demogorgon. I think I'm a big fan of Stranger Things, so that's probably my biasness coming in, but he is an extremely fun killer. He's quite unique, where he has the ability to traverse maps with his portals, and the portals are not displayed until he's used them, so that can be really cool. And then he has another ability where he can also charge up and do a lunge attack, and then he can do normal attacks as well. So there's a lot in Demogorgon's kit that you need to learn. I wouldn't say that he's particularly friendly for you being relatively new. I would say if you'd managed to master maybe the Doctor and Wraith, or the Spirit, or anybody in the very good and amazing category bar the Plague, then the Demogorgon could be a really good killer to pick up. I wouldn't necessarily pick him up as my very first killer. However, he does have some okay perks. Two of them one being Surge, so if anybody down in a radius of a terror within a radius of 32 meters to the generator will make it instantly explode. It's almost like you kicked it, and will take some of the aggression away. So again, a passive perk that you don't necessarily have to worry about a track. And then My Breaker can be really good for a lot of people that run Sprint Burst, even in the earlier ranks. So this will give you the ability to, if you see them on a generator, they have to go out of their way to walk before they can use their exhaustion perk. So that can be quite fun, although experienced players will play around this. So as much as I love Demogorgon and I think he's incredible, I'm going to have to say that if you were going out of your way to buy him, then he's probably average. But the best in average. So not something to be taken lightly, but outside of having all of the right perks for him, he can be a little bit tough, and he's probably the loudest killer in the game, which gives your position away quite a lot. Alright, so next up we have the Oni, and the Oni is a really unique killer in the sense that he can dash around, very similar to Blight, but doesn't have that collision with the objects, and he can be quite fun to get around the map really quickly. However, he's probably one of the survivors that has a unique playstyle in terms of that he slugs a lot, and slugging means leaving survivors downed, and it can be quite difficult to get going at the start of the game. So I think Oni has a lot of potential, quite high skill cap, but out of the box in terms of perks, nothing really to talk about with these. I definitely wouldn't be buying him for his perks on their own. They are good in certain builds, but not on their own, and I do think he's quite difficult. So I think for that reason, he's got great potential, but at the start, for a new killer, I'm going to have to say not so good. But I do think he could be more useful than Huntress, Clown and Nurse. But maybe not as easy to play and pull off as the Pig and the Hag. Alright, so next up we've got the Deathslinger, and Deathslinger, similar to the Huntress, is a projectile killer with the ability to shoot people with his gun and reel them in. I haven't played Deathslinger that much, as you see by level. I've actually played him more than Ghostface. Just played him at a lot lower level. And I can honestly say that with Deathslinger, he's quite difficult. So I highly recommend you playing Deathslinger if you want an extremely tough challenge and you want to feel good about getting people with your gun in the chase, or you're a big fan of first-person shooters. But outside of that, he is very difficult to master at the start, and you will find yourself being looped around quite a lot and probably miss your gun more often than not. And if you keep missing your gun, you might find that you just end up chasing people and not using your gun. At the same time though, you can fake using the gun, which can make survivors do really stupid things when they're looking behind, when you have no intention of shooting it, and so that can be quite funny. In terms of perks, nothing really to call out. Wouldn't go out of my way for any of these perks, albeit Hex Retribution can be useful in certain builds, but on its own it's going to be no good in this build, and therefore I cannot recommend the Deathslinger, and so he's going to have to be in the actively avoid, albeit I do think that he would be better than the Shape, Hillbilly and the Trapper. Alright, next up we have the Executioner, and as you can see, again, not a killer that I've pumped a lot of time into, and one that I find quite difficult to play and master at the moment, so need to give him a lot more TLC. If I'm brutally honest with you, I don't think that the Executioner is that great, especially for new killers. He'll be difficult to master his ability to use his special attack, which is ranged. I think for when you're against new survivors, you'll probably get them in your torment quite easily, which means you'll get a lot of cages of atonement, but you probably won't do so well at hitting his special attack, although with a bit of practice he does get better and better. In terms of his perks, I can't recommend them on their own. Again, similar to the Deathslinger, they're good in certain situations, but on their own wouldn't recommend, and therefore I think for this killer he can be a little bit complicated, a little bit hard to master, and I could find him being a lot more frustrating than some of the other killers. However, he does have the potential to get good, so for that reason I am going to put him in average, because I do think that he's better than and easier to use than all of the other killers before him, but I don't think on his own he's that great. Alright, next up we have the Blight, and the Blight is an extremely... Alright, so next up is the Blight, and the Blight is extremely fun and has the ability to traverse across the map extremely fast. However, he is an extremely hard killer to learn, and therefore I would argue that there probably is a debate that he's harder than the Nurse. So, and I think the reason for that is because you need to have a lot more map knowledge than say you need to with the Nurse. The Nurse, you need to really fine tune her power itself, whereas the Blight's power, bouncing off of walls and knowing when to attack survivors and what position to be in, and be able to get the right reads, is also dependent on how much you understand each map and loop and where he can bounce off and stuff like that. So I just think the complexity of Blight is just bigger than him himself, and therefore I could not recommend this killer to somebody that's new to the game, unless, like the Nurse, you want an extremely tough challenge. Now, unlike the Nurse has extremely good perks that you could go after. However, with the Blight, there is only really one good perk, and that is Hex Undying, and that perk only really becomes useful when you've unlocked perks with other killers, i.e. the Hag, or with, say, Spirit, or any other Hex totem that's worth having. Then Hex Undying then comes into play, but on its own, if you just went for Blight as a first time killer, I couldn't recommend him. So unfortunately, as much as I like Blight and I still have tons to learn with him, I'm going to have to put him into actively avoid. I do still think you could have a lot more fun with him. Than everybody else before him, because lower level survivors won't be expecting it, and surprisingly a lot of people don't actually know how to deal with the Blight. But once that luck runs out and you still have a lot to learn in the game, I think you'll find it quite difficult with him, and therefore he has to be an actively avoid killer. Alright, next up we have the Twins, and the Twins is a killer that I've started playing recently. She is the second newest killer to come out after Trickster. Honestly, the Twins is quite difficult, and you do need to have quite a lot of map knowledge with her also. And so for that reason, she will have to be another one I'd have to say actively avoid. When you're playing, the disorientation between playing as Charlotte and then switching to Victor will be a lot to have to manage and take on as a new killer, and therefore I don't think it's another thing that you want to necessarily be trying to tackle while you're trying to learn the finer details of Dead by Daylight. Also, for any survivor that kind of knows how to play against the Twins, and especially as you start coming up against more average survivors, you probably will miss the pounce quite a lot with Victor, and therefore good survivors will punish you and will kick Victor, and therefore just making you a standard killer, but with the extra complexity of trying to understand whether should I carry on with Charlotte and attack somebody, or should I now switch to Victor. And so for that reason, I think it's going to be extremely difficult for you to manage that, and for that reason it's difficult to recommend the Twins, and I'd probably actively avoid her. In terms of perks, nothing really to call out here that I think will enhance your gameplay. Coupe de Grace can be quite a fun perk to use, but its uses are limited and it wouldn't necessarily work on many killers, so I definitely wouldn't go for her perks, and for that reason I would look to actively avoid playing the Twins. And I'm actually gonna have to say that I do think she's probably worse to play than the Shape, which I didn't think I'd ever say or see that. Alright, and then last but not least is the Trickster, which is the newest killer to come out before Nemesis comes out tomorrow. He is similar to the Huntress in terms of his movement speed, and he's a projectile throwing killer. However, he has to hit survivors with multiple knives, which means it's more forgiving when you miss knives than if you miss an axe with the Huntress, but then you have to be in the chase longer to be able to get somebody in the injured state and then eventually down them. I think that the Trickster can be quite a frustrating killer to play against in certain loops, and therefore I wouldn't recommend him as a new killer. Looking at his perks, Starstruck can be quite good because it will give people the exposed status effect on survivors who leave your terror radius. So while you're carrying another survivor, any other survivors within your terror radius suffer from the exposed status effect, and I'll say that persists for 26, I think it's up to 30 seconds at rank 3, so that can be really cool. Outside of that though, and without pairing it up with other perks and on its entirety, I couldn't recommend the Trickster as a new killer, and therefore I'm going to have to put him into the also actively avoid. And again, not somebody that I think is better than the Shape. So that is it, guys. That brings us to our last killer on the tier list. I hope that you've really enjoyed this video. Please be sure to like, comment and subscribe. If your list is different, please let me know. I just want to end this video by saying that I have been a little harsher towards some of the DLC characters because you're putting money into them, but then at the same time I've also given some of those paid DLC characters a bit more light. And the reason why I've done that is because I've also tried to look at it from a understanding the game, your ability to have fun, learn, value for money. And so this is not a reflection of the best killers in the game. If you were talking about who is the absolute best of the best with the best player controlling them, then this list would look totally different. But this list was all about helping new people who have just started or recently started, and to understand what killers they should be going for or potentially shelling out some extra money for. Again guys, look, I hope you like this and enjoy this video. This is my first returning video back to the channel, and we will see you in the next video. Peace out.